I was folding laundry in my apartment when a memory surfaced from last year, one that still makes me smile with a mixture of satisfaction and lingering irritation. The soft cotton of my favorite t-shirt was warm in my hands, fresh from my own washer and dryer, and I couldn't help but think about how much I'd taken this simple luxury for granted before I finally upgraded my living situation. Back then, just 18 months ago, I didn't have the luxury of in-unit laundry. I relied entirely on the communal machines located in the small cinder block building by the apartment complex pool. It wasn't ideal, not by any stretch, but it was what I could afford at the time on my salary as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. The apartment itself was decent enough. A one-bedroom on the second floor with a balcony that overlooked the parking lot and, if you leaned way over to the left, offered a sliver of a view of the community pool. The rent was manageable, the neighbors were mostly quiet, and the location put me within 20 minutes of my office. But the laundry situation was always a source of stress. The building only had 4 washers and 4 dryers for the entire complex of 60 units, which meant weekends were a nightmare of waiting and timing and hoping you could snag a machine before someone else did. I developed a strategy over the months I'd lived there. Never do laundry on Saturday or Sunday unless absolutely necessary. Avoid the early morning rush when people try to get it done before work. My sweet spot was weekday evenings, usually around 7 or 8, after most people had eaten dinner but before the night owls emerged. I'd haul my hamper down the exterior stairs, cross the pool area, unlock the laundry room with a key all residents receive, and usually find at least 1 or 2 machines available. The laundry room itself was nothing special. Cinder block walls painted in institutional beige, fluorescent lights that hummed and occasionally flickered, a long folding table that had seen better days, and a bench that wobbled if you sat on the left side. There was a bulletin board by the door covered in faded notices about pool rules and reminders to clean the lint trap, and a trash can in the corner that was emptied maybe once a week if we were lucky. The whole place smelled like a combination of detergent, fabric softener, and something vaguely musty that no amount of cleaning ever quite eliminated. But it was functional, and that's what mattered. I'd load my clothes, add my detergent, feed quarters into the slot until the machine accepted my payment, and then I'd either wait there scrolling through my phone or, more often, head back to my apartment to use the time productively. The washers took about 35 minutes. The dryers about 45 if you were lucky, and they were actually heating properly. One particular evening in late September, after what had been an absolutely exhausting day at work, I gathered my overflowing hamper and made the familiar trek down to the laundry room. My boss had dumped a last-minute project on my desk at 4:30, right when I was planning to leave, and I'd spent an extra 2 hours reconciling accounts that should have been handled by someone in a different department entirely. My feet hurt, my head was pounding from staring at spreadsheets, and all I wanted was to get my laundry done, order some takeout, and collapse on my couch with something mindless on television. The sun was setting as I crossed the pool area, casting long orange and pink shadows across the concrete deck. The water was still and mirror-like, reflecting the darkening sky. I could hear distant laughter from somewhere in the complex, probably from one of the ground floor units where someone was having friends over. The air had that particular quality of early autumn in the south, still warm, but with the faintest hint of coolness that promised relief was coming eventually. Cicadas were starting their evening chorus in the trees that bordered the property. I unlocked the laundry room and was pleased to find it empty. All 4 washers were idle, their doors hanging open and inviting. I chose my usual machine, the second one from the left, which seemed to have the most reliable spin cycle. I loaded my clothes methodically, darks and colors all together, because I'd long since given up on the luxury of separating loads when each cycle cost $2 in quarters. I added my detergent, the cheap store brand stuff that came in a huge jug and smelled vaguely like artificial lavender, closed the door, and began feeding quarters into the slot. 8 quarters, $2, and the machine gurgled to life with a rush of water. I settled onto the bench, pulling out my phone and opening a game I'd been playing a pastime. The washer hummed and sloshed beside me, a rhythmic sound that was almost soothing after the chaos of my day. I considered walking back to my apartment, but decided I was too tired to make the trip twice more than necessary. So I sat there for the full 35 minutes, half watching my game, half zoning out and letting my mind wander. When the washer finally beeped to signal it was done, I stood up with a groan, my back stiff from the uncomfortable bench. I transferred my wet clothes to one of the dryers, the third one up in the vertical stack because the lower ones always seem to take longer. I had to stretch a bit to reach it comfortably, but I'd learned it was worth a minor inconvenience. I fed another 8 quarters into this machine, heard the reassuring tumble of the drum starting up, and felt the first wave of warm air begin to circulate. I glanced at my phone. 7:45. The dryer would be done around 8:30, maybe 8:35. Perfect timing to grab my clothes, head back upstairs, and still have time to order dinner before most places stop delivering. I took one more look around the laundry room, noting that I was still the only person there, and headed back to my apartment. The walk back felt longer than usual, my exhaustion really setting in now that I'd been sitting still for half an hour. I climbed the exterior stairs slowly, unlocked my door, kicked off my shoes, and immediately went to my couch. I set a timer on my phone for 45 minutes, not trusting myself to remember otherwise, and pulled up the menu for my favorite Thai place. I placed an order for pad CEW and spring rolls, confirmed the delivery time, and then just lay there staring at my ceiling fan as it rotated slowly above me. The timer went off at exactly 8:30. I dragged myself up from the couch, slipped my shoes back on, grabbed my empty laundry basket, and made my way back down the stairs. The sun had fully set now, and the exterior lights had come on, casting pools of yellow light across the walkways. The pool area was dimly lit by the underwater lights, giving the water an eerie blue-green glow. I could still hear voices closer now, and splashing sounds coming from the pool itself. Someone was taking an evening swim. I approached the laundry room and pulled open the door, already thinking about how good it would feel to have clean, warm clothes and food on the way. But the moment I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. Something was wrong. I could feel it before I even fully registered what I was seeing. The dryer I'd been using, the third one up, had its door hanging wide open. The drum inside was completely, utterly empty. My clothes were gone. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had I somehow remembered the wrong dryer? No, I definitely used the third one up. I always used that one. Had someone stolen my clothes? But who would steal someone's laundry? That made no sense. Had they fallen out somehow? I looked on the floor, on the folding table, on the bench. Nothing. Then, with a growing sense of dread and anger, I looked at the other dryers. The one directly below mine, the one that had been completely empty when I left 45 minutes ago, now had its door closed. I could see through the small window that there were clothes inside. Dark clothes. Clothes that looked suspiciously like mine. I stepped closer and pulled open the door. My clothes tumbled out slightly, still damp, wrinkled, and cool to the touch. They'd been taken out of the dryer mid-cycle and shoved carelessly into this empty machine. Just dumped in without any consideration, without any thought, like my time and money meant absolutely nothing. And in my dryer, the one I had paid for, the one that should have contained my warm, dry clothes, I stepped back and looked up at it again, really looked this time. Through the small, round window, I could see unfamiliar garments tumbling around. I reached up and opened the door, and immediately the small room filled with the unmistakable sharp, chemical scent of chlorine. The clothes inside were someone else's. Shorts, t-shirts, a couple of sports bras, all of them clearly soaked in pool water before being thrown in the dryer. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone had taken my clothes out of the dryer I had paid for, dumped them in an empty machine, and stolen my remaining dry time to dry their own pool-soaked clothes. They'd literally robbed me of the quarters I'd spent and the time I'd waited. Confusion and anger warred inside me, but anger was definitely winning. My hands were shaking as I tried to process the sheer audacity of what had happened. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't someone making an honest mistake. This was deliberate, entitled theft. Someone had looked at my running dryer, decided they wanted to use it instead of paying for their own cycle, and just help themselves. I walked over to the window that overlooked the pool, my heart pounding in my chest. The pool area was better lit now that it was fully dark, and I could see clearly into the water. There, splashing around and laughing without a care in the world, were 3 people in their underwear. 2 guys and a girl, all of them looking like they were in their early 20s, having the time of their lives. They were diving under the water, racing each other from one end to the other, and generally acting like they didn't have a concern in the world. It didn't take long to piece together what had happened. They decided on impulse to jump into the pool fully clothed. Maybe they'd been drinking, maybe they'd been dared, maybe they just thought it would be fun. But then they'd gotten out, realized they were soaking wet and uncomfortable, and spotted the laundry room right there next to the pool. They'd seen my dryer running, seen that it still had time left on it, and decided to help themselves rather than spend their own $2. They'd stolen my paid time to save themselves the minor inconvenience of feeding quarters into a machine. The rage that bubbled up inside me was white hot and all-consuming. consume me. I'm generally a pretty calm person. I don't like confrontation. I avoid conflict when I can. But something about this situation, about the casual disrespect and the entitled assumption that their convenience mattered more than mine, just ignited something in me. I'd had a terrible day. I was exhausted. I'd followed all the rules, paid my money, done everything right. And these three strangers had just casually decided that none of that mattered. I stood there at the window for a long moment, watching them play in the pool, completely oblivious to my presence or my anger. They had no idea I'd come back. They probably assumed they'd get their clothes dried, retrieve them, and no one would ever know what they'd done. They'd get away with it completely. Not if I had anything to say about it. I turned away from the window and walked back to the dryers with a sense of purpose. First things first, I opened my dryer, the one they'd stolen, and carefully removed their wet, chlorine-soaked clothes. The smell was even stronger now, that sharp chemical scent mixed with the mustiness of pool water. I piled them on the folding table. Then I opened the dryer below, the one where my clothes had been unceremoniously dumped, and transferred everything back to where it belonged. My clothes went back into the dryer I had paid for, the dryer that still had at least 20 minutes of time remaining on it. I closed the door and listened with satisfaction as my clothes resumed tumbling in the warm air. Now came the question of what to do with their clothes. I could have just left them on the table. That would have been the mature thing to do, the reasonable thing. But I was beyond reasonable at this point. They'd stolen from me, and I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences. I looked around the laundry room, my eyes eventually landing on a large trash can in the corner. It was one of those big industrial ones, maybe 30 gallons, with a metal rim and a plastic bag lining the inside. The bag never quite fit right, so there was always a gap between the plastic and the metal, a space where things could fall and become hidden. I picked up their wet clothes from the table and walked over to the trash can. Carefully, methodically, I shoved each piece down into that gap between the bag and the rim. The t-shirts, the shorts, the sports bras, all of it. I pushed them down far enough that unless someone really looked, unless they specifically reached down into that space, they'd never find them. From a casual glance, the trash can look completely normal, just an empty plastic bag waiting for garbage. I stepped back and surveyed my work. Their clothes were hidden. My clothes were drying in the machine I'd paid for. Everything was back as it should be, with a little added bonus of inconvenience for the people who'd thought they could take advantage of me. Then I settled onto the bench to wait. I wasn't going to make the mistake of leaving again. I was going to be right here when they came to collect their clothes, and I was going to watch what happened. My phone buzzed with a notification that my food delivery was 10 minutes away, but I ignored it. This was more important. I sat there in the humming fluorescent light, my arms crossed, listening to the rhythmic tumble of the dryer. Through the window, I could still hear splashing and laughter from the pool. They were taking their time, really enjoying their swim, completely unaware of what was waiting for them. About 15 minutes later, the dryer cycle ended with a loud beep. I stood up immediately, opened the door, and began loading my warm, dry clothes into my basket. They smelled clean and fresh, with just a hint of that artificial lavender from my detergent. I took my time, folding a few items right there, in no particular hurry. I wanted to be walking out right as they came in. The timing had to be perfect. I heard the laundry room door open behind me just as I was placing the last of my clothes in the basket. I didn't turn around. I just kept arranging things in my basket, moving slowly and deliberately. I could sense them entering, could hear their wet footsteps on the linoleum floor, could feel the shift in the air as they moved toward the dryers. Then I picked up my basket, turned, and started walking toward the door. As I passed them, I got a good look for the first time. The girl was short, maybe 5'3", with dark hair plastered her head. She had a beach towel wrapped around her shoulders, but was still clearly in just her underwear underneath. The two guys were taller, both athletic looking, one with a tattoo sleeve on his left arm. They were shivering slightly despite the warm evening, water still dripping from their hair and skin. They barely glanced at me as I walked past. They were too focused on the dryers, already moving toward the one they'd used, the one that should have contained their clothes. I pushed open the door and stepped out into the night. Behind me, I heard the dryer door open, then silence, then confused voices. Wait, where are our clothes? They were in this one, right? I'm sure they were. I remember. It was this one. The confusion in their voices was rapidly turning to panic. I kept walking, crossing the pool area at a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow. Just a person heading home with their laundry, nothing unusual. Did someone take them? Who would take wet clothes? Check the other dryers. I heard the sound of multiple dryer doors being yanked open, the metal-on-metal squeak of the hinges. More confused voices, rising in pitch now. They're not here. Check the washers. They're not in the washers either. I reached the stairs to my building and started climbing. Behind me, the voices were getting louder, more frantic. I allowed myself a small smile. Someone stole our clothes. What were we supposed to do? Who was that person who just left? That last question made my heart skip a beat. I was at the top of the stairs now, walking along the second floor walkway toward my apartment. I pulled out my keys, found the right one, and slid into my lock. Hey, hey! The shout came from below. I didn't look down. I turned my key, pushed open my door, and stepped inside with my basket of laundry. I was just pushing the door closed when I heard the sound of feet pounding up the metal stairs. I set my laundry basket down, took a deep breath, and tried to compose myself. My heart was racing, adrenaline flooding my system. Part of me couldn't believe what I'd just done. Part of me was absolutely thrilled by it, and part of me was nervous about what was about to happen. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and came down the walkway. They knew which apartment was mine. They must have seen which door I entered. The footsteps stopped right outside. 5 seconds of silence. Then someone started pounding on my door hard enough to rattle in its frame. Aggressive, demanding knocks that echoed through my small apartment. I waited a moment, letting them knock a second time, and then I walked calmly to the door. I took one more deep breath, arranged my face into an expression of polite confusion, and opened it. All 3 of them stood there on my doorstep, exactly as I'd seen them in the laundry room. Soaking wet, shivering slightly now that they were out of the water, and standing in the air-conditioned hallway, wearing nothing but their underwear. Water was actively dripping off them onto my welcome mat, forming small puddles. Their hair was plastered to their heads, and they had the slightly wild-eyed look of people who were very uncomfortable and very angry and didn't quite know how to handle the situation they found themselves in. The girl was in front, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Whether from cold or modesty, I couldn't tell. Her voice, when she spoke, was indignant and accusatory, with an entitled edge that made my blood boil all over again. You stole our clothes. I looked at her calmly, not saying anything for a moment, just letting the accusation hang in the air. Then I shifted my gaze to my laundry basket, which was sitting in plain view just inside my apartment, and gestured toward it with one hand. These are my clothes, I said, keeping my voice level and reasonable. I just got them from the dryer. The only dryer that was running when I went to collect my laundry. I watched as confusion flickered across their faces. The girl opened her mouth, then closed it again. One of the guys, the one with the tattoo sleeve, stepped forward slightly. But our clothes were in the dryer, he said, his voice less aggressive than the girl's, but still insistent. We put them in there, and now they're gone. The only dryer that was running was mine. I repeated, emphasizing each word slightly. The one I paid for earlier this evening. I left my clothes drying and came back to collect them. That's all. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They couldn't admit they'd taken my clothes out of my dryer without incriminating themselves. They couldn't explain how their clothes had disappeared without acknowledging what they'd done. They were trapped by their own actions, unable to accuse me of anything without confessing their own theft. The second guy, shorter than the first with bleached tips in his hair, tried a different approach. His voice was more wheedling, almost pleading. Look, we're just trying to find our clothes. Did you see anyone else in the laundry room? Anyone who might have taken them? I shook my head slowly. I didn't see anyone, just my clothes in my dryer. I paused, then added with exaggerated politeness. Is there anything else I can help you with? The question hung in the air between us. It was a dismissal, polite but firm, and they knew it. The girl looked at the 2 guys, her expression a mixture of anger and helplessness. The tattooed guy looked down at the puddle of water forming around their feet. The shorter guy just stared at my laundry basket, as if willing their clothes to materialize there. They had nothing, no evidence, no proof, no way to accuse me without admitting what they'd done. And I could see the moment when they realized it, when the fight went out of them and they understood they'd been outmaneuvered. No, the girl finally said, her voice small and defeated. No, there's nothing else. They turned, the 3 of them moving in awkward synchronization, and started walking back down the hallway toward the stairs. No shoes, no dry clothes, just wet underwear and beach towels and the rapidly cooling evening air. I watched them go, watched as they descended the stairs and disappeared from view. Only then did I allow myself to close the door. I locked it, engaged the deadbolt, and leaned back against it, my heart still pounding. Through my door, I could hear their voices fading as they moved away from my building, though I couldn't make out the words anymore. I imagined them trudging back to the laundry room, searching more frantically for their clothes, maybe eventually finding them in the trash can, or maybe giving up and going home in their wet underwear. I never found out which, but I do know that I never saw any of them at that pool again. Not once in the remaining months I lived in that apartment. Maybe they moved out. Maybe they were just visiting someone. Or maybe, just maybe, they learned a valuable lesson about respecting other people's property and not stealing what doesn't belong to them. I walked over to my couch and finally sat down, the adrenaline slowly slowly draining from my system and leaving me shaky and exhausted. My phone buzzed again. My food delivery had arrived and was waiting at my door. I got up, retrieved it, and spent the rest of the evening eating pad, CEW, and folding my warm, clean, legitimately dried clothes. And every single time I fold laundry now in my new apartment with my own washer and dryer, I think about that night and smile. It probably wasn't the most mature way to handle the situation. I probably should have just confronted them directly or reported them to the apartment management. But sometimes, just sometimes, a little bit of petty justice feels absolutely perfect. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe for more.